This is INCRadio, DCEM 954, the voice of truth, the official radio station of the Church of Christ or Iglesianicristo.
And good morning, everyone, and welcome to INC Radio Florida. I'm one of your hosts, Brother Robert Pauls, coming to you, well, actually today, not from my home studio there in Tampa, Florida, but we're here in Jacksonville for a very special activity for us here in the District of Florida, which we'll be talking about probably in next week's episode. But again, here in beautiful Jacksonville, it's sunny. It's cooler than it is there in Tampa, which is probably not surprising, but very welcome. And looks like it's going to be another wonderful Florida morning here. Of course, today is the 17th of May, Saturday, about 9:30 in the morning, which means it's a little bit past 9:30 in the evening there in the Philippines. But I'd also like to welcome my co-host for this morning on this very engaging and deep topic that we're going to be talking about. But good morning, Sister Audrey. How are you doing there in Tampa?
Good morning, Brother Robert. Hello, everyone. Sister Audrey Tapala is joining you from Tampa, Florida, here in the bright, sunny side of the state. The weather's definitely been warming up. So if you haven't already started to dress in your cooler layers of clothing, do so now and stay hydrated because the impending heat of summer is upon us for sure. But we've got a really great topic for you later on today, and we're so excited to discuss it further. So stay tuned. And of course, we want to greet everyone around the world. Hola, ciao. Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Drop below in the comments. We want to hear from what time it is in your area, because we know that this is an international show and that we're having you join us from all over the world. So we're very excited for you to be joining us on INC Radio Florida. So, Brother Robert, we're so excited to talk about our topic today.
I am too. I think, one of our greatest gifts that we talk about all the time is our children. And wanting to teach our children life lessons is such a tough thing for parents. And one of the topics or one of the life lessons is what we're going to be talking about today, which is teaching your children the differences between humility and what we call low self-esteem, humility versus low self-esteem, because one of the biggest challenges with children growing up is them learning how to be resilient because, we all understand that life is hard. Life is not easily handed to you. So your children need to learn these life skills in order for them to be able to really, make their way through the world. And today's topic, we're going to be covering and discussing the differences between humility and low self-esteem. So let's go ahead and jump right into the topic because I think it's really important that, we start by defining the differences between what humility is and what low self-esteem is, because a lot of people sometimes will confuse those two subjects, Sister Audrey. I think, one of the biggest challenges is in society today, because of the prevalence of social media, because of the prevalence of these influencers who really have this impact on the youth, to live this perfect life, right? And to have the perfect face, perfect body, and all the things in life that we usually are associated with success. And what that does oftentimes for our children is it develops or starts to have them build the sense of a low self-esteem. So we're going to dive into the topic this morning, and we're going to start by really defining what are the differences between the two. So when we talk about humility is really understanding and recognizing your value. And you don't necessarily need to be arrogant about it. Because when you talk about what your value is what it is that you bring to the table, as they say sometimes, that you do have good qualities, you do have the skills, but it may just be that you don't necessarily need to be arrogant or boast about that, right? And then when we go to low self-esteem as the next definition. When you talk about low self-esteem typically means that you undervalue yourself. And that's so often prevalent today, like I said, because many of our youth are comparing themselves with what they see out in society through social media. And it gives you this sense of inadequacy, that you feel as if you are not worthy or that you are less than you actually are. And low self-esteem is a very self-destructive sort of personality trait that we really want our children to not develop. We want to help build them up, because that's really our goal, is to help our children build themselves up with self-confidence. But being self-confident doesn't mean that you have to be arrogant, right? So we want to be sure that that's a path that we help guide for them. So when we take a look at the key differences, and I guess this is the simplest way to really spell this all out, is that humility, somebody who's humble will say, I'm good, but I can always do better. I can improve, right? That's typically what you'll hear from a person who's humble, no matter how successful they are, no matter how great of an accomplishment they've just done. You'll always hear, well, we could do better, or they'll give credit to someone else. Of course, in the church, as Christians, we give our credit always to God, because that is where all of our skills and all of our successes come from. But when we talk about low self-esteem, a person with low self-esteem is probably walking around constantly in their head saying, I'm not good enough. And that really is, like I said before, a very toxic or self-destructive sort of state of mind that we don't want our children to have to kind of endure. And one of the biggest challenges is when you're in school. I don't know, Sister Audrey, I know you were having some problems with the internet. I don't know if you're back on, but going through school, I know that for me, when I talk about middle school and high school, that's probably during prehistoric times. So yours is a little bit more recent, right? Was that one of the biggest challenges that you had compared to what you see today in the youth? Because I seem to feel like today the youth have so many more challenges because of social media and the comparisons that they have to make, that it's driving that self-esteem further versus when maybe you were in high school. But I guess when you were in high school, social media was already around, right?
Oh yes. I'm in the generation of millennials where we at one point, now I'm towards the latter end. So at one point we did not have technology, but social media was growing. It was born and it started to grow, and almost kind of with our generation. So as social media, different platforms, different ways of sharing started to develop and started to branch out in different platforms, so did our age group. So it was almost like from your adolescence through your teens, through young adults. There were different avenues of how to share about our lives. And it was fascinating because it used to be something so innocent. And I'm going to use innocent because there wasn't a whole lot of meaning behind it. There was a way where someone just took a picture of your dog, or like how beautiful the sky looked from a parking lot. And those were the pictures that we shared on Instagram. And so now that things are starting to be a little more curated, there's ways of being creative when you share, because it's going to drive viewers. The essence of sharing suddenly changed. So I think tying into that, it's almost like the lines are starting to look a little blurry. I don't know if it's more difficult per se, if for this next generation to overcome low self-esteem. I know for sure it looks different, because I don't know, for me, I had a chapter of life where I had low self-esteem, but it was almost like something clicked, and it was just like, who cares? The only ones that whose opinions matter to me are the ones that I keep within my private circle, and that's whose voices I should value. So I don't know. I think it's different. I don't know if it's quite harder, but yes, there was definitely a time where it's almost how you portray yourself on your social platform that defines the kind of person, or the person that people view you as. And I heard somewhere, someone say, you're not supposed to see, like, it's like that kind of thinking where you're not supposed to know how you look like until someone invented a mirror. It's kind of along those lines of, you're not supposed to know what people think about you until social media happened. And then all of a sudden you get this influx of like negative and positive opinions about you. So it's a different time for sure.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right, because I think social media has kind of propelled this now mirror, sort of, so to speak, right? This virtual mirror. Now, all of the things that you do and all the things that you're seeing are a reflection of what people are putting out there, right? And one of the challenges, I think, when you talk about growing up, and I think you bring up a good point, because as we get older, and I'm obviously far older, you start to build this sense that people's opinions don't matter as much, other than the opinions of the people that you care about, people that you love, the people that are in that, as you said, small circle. And I think that the challenge for the youth, though, is that they are still trying to make their place in the world, and they're trying to find where they fit. And part of that invites all of these other opinions from people that, they may not even talk to in 5 years, or that they won't even really build a relationship with. And that's really where I think with our children, we need to start as early as possible to start helping them build sort of that self-confidence, which is going to help to battle that low self-esteem. We're going to talk about how is it as parents, can we actually start to see in our children, what are some of the signs, because it's really hard when you're a parent to look at your child and differentiate between, oh, they're just so humble. They're just so humble. That's why they don't take credit for anything. They're just so humble. That's why they don't really want to stand up in front of everybody and speak, etc. Or they're shy, right? That's a big thing in our culture. They're just shy. There's
or they don't talk about themselves, or they don't care about themselves. Yeah.
But the thing is that when you look at it, that line is very nuanced. It's very fine between the two, right? And as a parent, I think it's really important that we start to recognize as early on, when they're elementary school, when they're getting into middle school, because middle school is rough. Middle school is like a battleground. I remember when Kat, our daughter, was going into like middle school versus high school, and everything you see on TV used to be like high school was like really rough. High school was where all the bullies were, it's where all the mean girls were, it's where all of that stuff happens. But what she told me says, no, it's middle school. Middle school is where things can get really tough, because boys are just mean, and the girls are starting to develop.
It's like this unwarranted confidence, because I remember middle school me. I don't know where I got this burst of confidence from, but it's like I felt like I had the audacity to act a certain way, and if I could go back, I'd be like, You
feel like you should have dialed it back a little?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Maybe we should invite some of your old middle school friends onto the show.
That's okay.
We could talk about middle school Audrey and see how she is. Well, the thing is that when you're, as a parent, you start to look at the signs from your kids, and you start to read, you start to pick up little things. Like, for example, here we're going to talk about what are some of the signs of humility in your children. One is, if they're openly willing to admit mistakes. And when they admit mistakes, that doesn't mean after you've threatened them 3 times, took away their iPad, locked them in the room, and then they finally surrendered, right? Willingly means that they come up front and say, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, right? Or this is what happened and it's my fault. They accept responsibility, because a humble person knows that they're not perfect, but they also know they can do better. So that means that they're willing to accept or admit their mistakes. Another is that they celebrate other people's success without being jealous, right? And that's tough, because sometimes, you're out there, you're playing basketball, you're playing soccer, you're playing, whatever sport you're in, especially if you're highly competitive, right? I know a few competitive people in my family.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. My son, very competitive. But when you look at the genuine happiness that people have when somebody else wins, right? So if you're competing with someone and if that person wins, you're like, yeah, you put up a good competition. Congratulations, I'm really happy for you. You're genuinely celebrating with them, not like the, oh, hey, good game, and then you turn around and you're saying like, oh, I hope you slip and fall on the way out or whatever, or we'll get you next time kind of a thing. It's important to understand that you want them to have this genuine sense of joy when other people also win, because, it's not always going to be you. And that's another sign of somebody who's humble, is they have that genuine sense of joy when somebody else wins in a competition. And they also ask questions about how to seek growth. And I know that's kind of a tough concept, but they'll ask questions like, what could I have done to do better? Right? And that's hard to hear from kids, because a lot of kids, I don't think, have enough self-awareness. And maybe they're developing it, but they need to have that sort of self-awareness to be able to ask themselves, what could I have done better? Or what could I have done different to make this situation or this outcome different, right? So those are all kind of key signs for humility. Now let's hop on over to the other side of that, and let's look at, well, what happens when you start to recognize signs that could be indicators that your children are suffering from low self-esteem. And I've seen this. I mean, in before I started doing a lot of the research on this, realized, wow, these are like red flags that you want to pick up early, because sometimes, as parents, for example, the first one, apologizing. If our kids apologize for making mistakes, we feel like, oh, well, good. They learn to accept their mistakes. They learn how to admit the mistakes. But there's a difference between that and constantly apologizing. Constantly apologizing for things that they didn't even do wrong. Sometimes they're indicators of lower self-esteem, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, you say, oh, that's not the coffee that I wanted, right? Honest mistake. And then, oh, I'm so sorry. And that's because, again, they're starting to develop this sense that they feel as if they aren't worthy, or they're always constantly doing the wrong thing, making mistakes. So constantly apologizing is another thing that we need to look out for. And then difficulty accepting praise. We talked about that before, that when we talk about accepting praise, that means that if someone is telling you, you look fabulous today, or that you did awesome in that basketball tournament or that volleyball tournament.
I know. Thank you for finally taking that.
See, look how humble you are. Okay? You're so humble that you're willing to accept that praise with no difficulty whatsoever.
I'm glad someone else noticed.
Someone recognized, right? But that's, and that is a tough thing, because I think naturally good people just feel uncomfortable sometimes, right? When they're getting all of this praise thrown on them, but being able to accept it and is one thing, but like constantly like super shy, walking away and just not being able to do it. Could be being shy, but it's also kind of an indicator that maybe they're having a tough time with their self-esteem. Right.
I've also seen the reaction when some youth who you can tell they have very low self-esteem, when they hear praise, they almost deny it, or they think, oh, did they really mean that, or was that sarcastic, or did I? And then all of a sudden it turns into the spiral of, well, no, that's not really what they meant. They're picking something out, and I did something wrong, and it's this whole it's this black hole of negative thoughts that start to fill in the gaps of something that wasn't there in the first place.
Well, it's like overthinking, right? We hear that all the time. Mm-hmm. Like, someone gave you a compliment, and rather than accept it, you are overthinking all of the things like, why are they doing it? Or are they trying to get something from me? Is this, are they trying to manipulate me or whatever? And I think that's just not being able to just accept the fact that somebody recognizes that you did a good job. And that's something that comes with sort of practice and training, that it's got to be developed, because I think it's really important that we start to pick up these signs and we start to really try to tackle them as early as possible. So this way it starts to build that confidence in kids, because that's a tough thing for them to start developing. And then the last one, that they avoid challenges out of fear of failure. I think that's really a really clear sign is that, look, that looks really hard. I'm not good enough to do that, so I'm just not going to even try. Or I didn't study enough for my exam, so I'm just not going to even show up, and I'm just going to take the F. I'm going to take the failure. It's really really theirs is one of the areas where we could start to say, hey, for us in the church especially, right? We've got that one little nugget in our back pocket, and that's the fact that God will take care of us as long as we put in the work. We've talked about that before. And, through prayer and through confidence and through work, all of those combined, that's the way that we can accomplish whatever it is that we set out to do, as long as we remain faithful to that. But when our kids start to just avoid doing things completely because they just feel like, I'm not going to be able to do that, that's too hard, and there's always somebody better than me, then that's obviously a very clear sign that they may be struggling with their self-esteem. I mean, when you were going through, obviously you've gone through a variety of different things in life with, career changes, marriage, having babies or baby. Sorry, didn't mean to. Don't want to start anything. There were
hopeful future.
Yeah, I'm manifesting for. But I'd always gotten a sense that you really have this sort of attitude of, I'm going to try everything at least once, right? And do you think that comes from more of just you're a thrill seeker, or is it self-confidence? Because obviously people who aren't that probably would feel a lot less likely or willing to try new things.
Yeah, this was a discussion I had with my husband recently, just because he's so fortunate to be in a place of employment where there's constant reflection of what kind of personality you are and how you fit into a team and what your assets are. So in that sense, I always thought I was an advocate of the people. So someone that kind of spoke up for someone whose voices weren't heard, and trying to be as detail oriented in that sense. And then it wasn't until recently I took this test, and it specifically said it was like free will or something of that, where it's like you kind of go after things at your own whim. And I think tying along to just kind of making sure I do things at least once. I don't know if you know this about me, Brother Robert, but we kind of have competitive nature in our family, and I tend to be just a little competitive. just a little competitive. And so I think that kind of adventure seeking, not really knowing where I'm at when it comes to the thing you're going to do until I actually do it. Because I it's something that my parents, and especially my dad, really did a good job, was put things down on paper, and this is the objective outcome. This is where you are. Regardless of how you're feeling, how others feel about you, this is it. So do what you want to do with it. Either you stay or you improve, but this is the objective result. And so I think wanting to dabble in a little bit of everything, and see where I was at was kind of, I would say it was the curiosity part of it. I think I really loved what Show Santiago said in the comments. Be curious and not critical. Be careful, not crushing. Ask, don't assume. Connect before you're correct. And I really attach to that. Be curious and not critical, because yes, as you are in competitive nature, sometimes the automatic go-to is to be critical. But I think when you change the verbiage there, it changes your mindset on how you look at things and how you try things out.
Yeah, I think that's an important set of sort of mantras, I guess, if you will, to carry with you, because they all kind of resonate with everyone on the topic of life. And I'd love to hear from a lot of our members of the audience, because we've talked about it before, that culturally a lot of these things are driven, right? They always have people tend to always categorize or pigeonhole certain cultures, right, as being more shy, being more confident, being more outspoken. And I think that here in the States, things become more of a level playing field, but you still carry a lot of that, what we'll call cultural baggage, with you when you come over, right? Where you're, I'm this, so I'm not supposed to be overconfident. I'm not supposed to be, showing off, because that's not the way that we're raised. And I think that there's a way to be able to be self-confident without necessarily damaging, your relationships because of arrogance. But
boastful.
at the same time, the negative effects of that is that when you come here, then you're overwhelmed, because now, if you're raised in a culture, for example, and we'll just like in most Asian cultures, it's already assumed that you're going to be very shy, withdrawn, sort of not overconfident. And then you come here to the United States, where you're kind of in a mixed society now, and you're kind of mixed with different cultures. Some of them are going to be very overbearing. That helps to feed low self-esteem as well, because now all of a sudden you are surrounded by others who may not necessarily be better than you, may not necessarily be as good as you, but just because they talk about it, just because they are constantly putting it out there, versus you, where you're a lot more reserved. So you can go from being humble, I think, very easily, and get pulled into a sense of low self-esteem if you're not constantly being fed that self-confidence. But when we start to look at these signs, obviously as parents, we want to be able to try to tackle them as soon as possible, to try to come up with ways or strategies to be able to help our children, overcome these. And we want to just throw a few tips that were out there, because I think it's important. And again, these tips are things that you are encouraged to use as guides, because, again, we're not clinical psychologists, but we're both parents. and
Parents who Google.
parents who have access to other parents who've had much more experience in this.
Parents who talk in Google.
Exactly. And the thing is that we've got, obviously, I think there's a lot of data behind a lot of these tips, because these are obviously things that have worked in their families, and a lot of this information has been developed and has been validated. Because when you talk about what are some of the strategies as parents that we can undertake to help build our children's skill for being humble, teaching them how to be humble, but without necessarily harming their self-worth, because that's the danger, right? There's a very sort of gray area or nuanced area there. So the first is modeling behavior. So parents, we should be the ones who actually show our children humility by, in our own words and our actions, that we admit mistakes when we make them, right? As a parent, sometimes it's tough, because we're supposed to be always right. We're supposed to always be the ones who know what we're doing.
Yeah, I think when it comes to humility too, I think the person who says that they are humble is probably the least humble person in the room, because it's the quality that is felt and seen by others when it's being shown, as opposed to being told by the person doing the action. I think that's the essence of true humility.
Right. Well, and I think that's a great point, because people tend to have to overcompensate, right? Because they know that they don't have the skills, or they know that they're not as talented as that other person, but they feel that if I show off, or I speak over them, or I put everything out there, I may not know what I'm talking about, that gives and portrays self-confidence and what we would consider a higher self-esteem. But as parents, if our children get to see us willing to not apologize, but admit when we make mistakes, for example, and know that, you were right. Sometimes our kids can be right too, because they have access to Google, and they can look stuff up probably faster than us. So
Or they're repeating something that we've said before. Not that my son can speak yet, but I've already had that effect from my own siblings.
Well, it's funny because there's this thing that I've seen on, I don't know if it's on social media or it's a story about this little boy, this mom and this little boy or little girl sitting in a car seat in the back. They pull up to a drive-through at a coffee place. And when they pull up to the drive-through at the coffee place, the mom's ordering coffee. And she goes, so I'd like to order a coffee. And then you hear the little baby in the back, the kid in the back go, I want a cookie. And the mom saying, she's ordering the coffee. She turns around and says, we have cookies at home. And then the little kid goes, well, we have coffee at home. And then you see the mom go, and I'd like a cookie too. Surrendering and knowing that, our children are sometimes going to be smarter than us. But at the same time, we also have to be willing to let them know that we're not perfect and we will make mistakes and we'll admit them, we'll accept them, we'll take responsibility for them. It's a teaching opportunity. But because the old way used to be, don't do as I do as I say, right? That's such a popular parental sort of speech that's given. And a lot of times that really sends mixed signals to our children. I mean, I get it. The reason we say it is because we know we're human, we're flawed. But when we say something to do it a certain way, it's because we've learned from experience and we know what the right thing is to do. But sometimes we'll slip, but that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do just because we slipped. It's still wrong. That's why we say, don't do as I do as I say. But, we've also said before that, making good decisions usually comes from experience, and experience usually comes from making bad decisions. So we want our kids to avoid as many bad decisions and experiences as possible, which is do that. We also talked about earlier in the show about praising their efforts, right? And not just the outcome. When we talk about that, it's, you didn't win or you didn't, come out with the outcome or the result that you wanted. But we want you to understand that, you really did put all of your effort in. You put your all into it. And that meant that it was really important to you. And you need to recognize and praise that for them, because what that helps to do is it starts to help build that mindset of growth that, oh, great, well, what did I do wrong? Or can I do better next time? And that's the growth mindset that we want in our kids. Right? We don't want them just walking around with their heads low because I didn't win. We want them to have their head up high, realizing, well, I was so close, or I finished what I was supposed to. I finished the race, but I didn't come out first. What can I do better next time to improve my time? Or what can I do next time to really make better decisions? And it gives them that growth mindset that we really want them to start really enabling in them, and we really want them to embrace. But at the same time, it also starts to build resilience. Resilience is actually going to be the topic of one of our upcoming episodes. We're going to be talking about how is it that you can build resilience in your children, because resilience is a really, really tough thing to teach. It really is. I was talking with one of our other sisters that was here in East Jacksonville, Sister Annie, and we were talking about this just the other day, that resilience is a tough thing to teach sometimes, because sometimes you just have to experience it in order for you to be able to start building that resilience. And it's something that we don't want our kids to have to go through, but sometimes that's just
what it takes,
right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's like an on and off switch. So I mean, like from experience, I think that moment where it kind of comes in with that not wanting to be in a place where you were so concerned of how others thought about you, and that defined who you are. That's a lot of other qualities start to come in with confidence and not low self-esteem. But I think resilience also comes with that as part of a over time kind of thing. Like it builds as you go.
Absolutely. And when we can get them to start building that resilience, And that's really the whole basis of resilience. It's a building block. And as you start to build more and more resilience, you become stronger and subsequently start to develop higher self-esteem and self-confidence because you're more resilient to things, right? Your body's more resistant and your mind is more resistant to the failures, right? You're able to look at how you can do better. Teaching them how to handle compliments, that's a tough thing. I know compliments are a very hard thing for you to accept, Sister Audrey, but you're working on it. Yeah, you're working on it. So we're working on that character flaw. But learning how to accept praise graciously, I think that's such a key word because we would joke like this. Oh my gosh, you did so well, and they go, "Oh, stop it some more. Just stop it some more." Because you want to be able to be gracious, you want to be thankful, you want to be very appreciative and show gratitude for accepting that praise without necessarily being like, yeah, I know I'm the best. No one else is as good as me in doing that. So we want them to accept graciously accept praise, and it's something we have to teach them how to do. Remind them, teach them, enough. Please just remember that, when people tell you you're doing good, where does all of that come from? It comes from God. Comes from you having learned and putting the effort in and all of those things. And just always remember that because that's the way that we can help them to kind of understand how to be humble and not become overbearing. Correcting them with care, that's kind of an important piece, right? We want to be sure that our kids are disciplined, but we also want to discipline them in a way that encourages them to kind of look at what they did, not necessarily I can't believe you're the worst child ever. That's so shameful. How could you do that? You put shame on our family. Those are all tough things that really help to destroy the self-esteem of a young child. We want to build encouragement and humility by having them understand, okay, I understand it. You made a mistake. Things didn't go the way it was supposed to. This was a tough lesson to be learned, but there's a lesson in there, right? And then you want them to reflect, what was the lesson? What was it that came out of it? Now, discipline usually involves punishment at the same time, but you also want to be sure that along with that punishment is a lesson. And what is that lesson that they're learning through the reflection, right? And that's what we want them to focus on. And then another thing about reflection is that when they do have things that happen, we want them to be able to reflect and not necessarily compare, because comparison is such a toxic thing to have to do, right? Why compare yourself to others? Why compare yourself to that player or that person or this? Because you are an individual.
Your circle changes. Humans travel everywhere. So the standard it might be in one place may not be the same in another. So it's almost like you're relying on your core values on who you're surrounded with. So it's very, very dangerous waters to rely on that.
Right. Well, and you don't want your core values to necessarily have to be based on other people's opinions, right? And that's where comparison starts to come in, because at that point, well, they look prettier in that dress than I do, or I can't run as fast as that person. And when you're doing that is, well, what is it about you and your mission or whatever it is that you're undertaking to help yourself do better? And I think that's the area that we need our kids to start really focusing on, is reflection, self-reflection. I think if one lesson you walk away from this as parents is teaching our kids to self-reflect, because self-reflection will teach them to not only look at the mistakes and things that went wrong, but hopefully it also helps them to understand the things that went right, the things that were good about what they did, and appreciating that, because those lessons are just as valuable as the lessons around what did I do wrong and why did I fail. And we want them to keep nurturing sort of that feeling of self-esteem and growth through self-reflection. So the last
trophy matters too, right?
The trophy matters. The trophy matters if you need to fill a space on a wall someplace. Okay, so it's a tool, right? A trophy is a tool for self-reflection, because every time you look at that trophy, then you're going to hopefully look at what are the things that I did that got me that trophy, because that's again another lesson that you can learn versus just, yeah, come and look at the trophy, look at my shelves, I've got all of these things hanging on the wall, but each of them, there should have been a lesson that they learned from that.
Ooh, and to add to that, I think kind of touching base on where we were talking about earlier, yes, while this next generation's barriers are looking a little different and the challenges seem different because of social media, I think what I do appreciate about this next generation is they are talking about the processes and focusing on that more than the outcome. So openly discussing topics like this. I think I'm finding more youth being able to have those serious conversations while, their experience is still lacking. I think it's important that they're all to recognize that at least the youth that I've come into, they're a little more open about wanting to have these more serious topics as opposed to kind of how it was when I was growing up, because I think it was a little bit there's a stigma to, if you wanted to talk about it, it's like, oh, you sound just like my parents, or you weren't cool enough if you wanted to talk about things like this when you were 13. So I will say to the youth now, I think it's starting to be normal that having these conversations is a good thing, and that will add to your journey in life.
Right. Well, in talking, right, just having conversations. And when we say conversations, it's not texting. It's not sending messages through your social media platform. It's having real conversations.
Sending voice notes, because apparently that's a thing now.
Oh, I know. When did you go from having actual physical conversations to texting to now I'm listening to recordings of people's voices, but still, and I know this is completely off topic, but it still disarms you, right? Because you have to listen, but you can't say anything. Unless you send a voice note back.
You're getting video clips. It's like, why couldn't you just come over?
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's a part of just avoidance, right? They don't want to avoid the conversation. They want to avoid the conversation or avoid the conflict. So they'd rather just leave a voice message and video. Because could you imagine back in the day if that's how girlfriends and boyfriends broke up? Video.
No, that would be so one-sided.
It's like, no. It's not. It's honestly, it's not me. It's you. I just don't like you. That's that would be the crux of the message, right? But when we talk about self-esteem, because that obviously is very damaging to one's self-esteem, but we want to start building self-esteem intentionally, meaning you're actually doing it with intent. And the way you start to do that, especially with your children, is to celebrate your unique strengths and your personality traits. Like I said, it's self-reflection is not about just looking at all the bad things, the things that went wrong. You have to look at all of the great strengths that you have as an individual, and you need to celebrate those and learn how to add on top of them, right? Use those as building blocks. Another one is let your kids lead in areas of interest or talent. I love parents, and I'm super excited about parents, and I hope to have a couple on the show that encourage their kids to take on whatever talent or interest that they have and let them really just make a run for it. And here's an example, right? We have parents in our district who have children who have expressed an interest in wanting to start their own businesses. And I'm talking about 10-year-olds, right? 12-year-olds. And they just really just go all in to support them. They help them build the structure. They help them to, maybe oftentimes even seek funding, right? for their endeavor, for their little entrepreneurial endeavor. But then they help to really foster sending them out and saying, okay, this is your business, you run it. Because then you give your children that space to be able to learn to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes. So this way now they can make better decisions. But at the same time, of course, as a parent, we're always going to be there. Right, we're going to be there to catch them because we never want our children to fall. But you let them take the lead, right? Don't be the parent who's going to be just so overbearing, micromanaging. Helicopter parenting was a term, right? That was a thing for a while.
Yeah, and it's just, for some reason, it was Dragon Mom. That was very
Dragon Mom, yeah.
moms.
Yeah. I remember that phrase from a few years ago. But you want your children to be able to learn these things on their own and give them the opportunity to take charge of things. So this way they can make the mistakes, learn from them, and do better. And I mean, it sounds like a really simple formula, but as a parent, when you're sitting on the sidelines, that's a completely different story, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're like, no, I don't want them to make the mistake. You want to jump in. But you want to be able to be sure that you give your children the opportunity to lead these things themselves. So this way they have a sense of accomplishment, but also it gives them an opportunity to learn. The next is help them to set achievable goals, right? Children sometimes can be overconfident and say that, I'm going to do 15 different things this semester on top of my classes. I've never run before in my life, but I'm going to do an Ironman in 6 months, right? Because then you set your children up they set themselves up for failure, and failure and disappointment leads to, again, low self-esteem. So giving them good metrics or good guardrails for setting up achievable goals to help them feel and experience success. I always say it's more about the little wins. Let them have little wins in the beginning, so this way they can start to build on those, and that's where the bigger wins will come from. And then, of course, the number one thing, and we all do it already, hopefully, is provide just never-ending emotional support, because every facet of their growth is going to need us to help give them that support, because it's like we said in the beginning, it's a tough world, and it's a tough world, and our kids need to learn how to be resilient. Our kids need to learn how to have not low self-esteem, but we need to be there to provide that emotional support for them, and that's only going to happen through conversations. That's what we've talked about, right? On our show, we want a lot of these topics to have these ongoing conversations happen long after we're off the air, because I think that's where it's going to be important as parents for us to be able to have that kind of impact on our children. So, I'm really hopeful that today's show had some good nuggets of information, because this is really a focal point for us, is trying to help give our kids the tools, help equip them to be able to prepare for their future. And most importantly, as parents, we don't want to see our children fail, but sometimes it's just a way for them to be able to learn. So I'm hoping that this was I know, Sister Audrey, you've got a few years ahead of you of training little Jamie to become a humble human being with high self-esteem and lots of self-worth.
And if not, his grandparents will be keeping me accountable.
So we can't wait. But, it really is just, I think, such an important thing for our children to be able to feel that they do have that support from us as parents, especially. And most importantly, that we continue in the church to encourage them by giving them all of the resources necessary for them to be able to be successful, especially through the lessons that we learn in our worship services, and of course through all of the various activities in the church, because I can't think of a better way to build your self-esteem than to be active in the projects of the Church of Christ here, the INCRadio, and continue to experience success through your activeness in those projects. So before we go, I wanted to just, of course, acknowledge those that helped to make this program possible for us. And it starts, of course, with our beloved executive minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, that we'd also like to express our gratitude and thankfulness to Brother Angelo Carano Manalo, our CEBSI CEO and president. And then most importantly, also, we'd like to thank Brother Wally Tarai, our station manager, and of course, this show couldn't be possible without our executive producer, Brother Mandy and Daya. Thank you so much for all of your support on this program, for tuning in and watching. To all of our viewers today, thank you for the comments. And we hope to see you next week once again here. But this is Brother Robert DePaulis here in Jacksonville, Florida today. And then for Sister Audrey that's there in Tampa, holding down the fort. We want to thank everyone for joining us today here on INCRadio Florida. Stay tuned, because coming up shortly is going to be INCRadio Washington, D.C. Have a great Saturday.
Bye, everyone.